to ensure responsible gun ownership, as well as protecting New Yorkers from gun violence. And I wish this wasn't a topic we needed to talk about today. Had there not been a decision by the Supreme Court at the end of June, we would not be having this conversation.
You saying the only reason we are here is because of the Supreme Court is honestly like a rapist saying the only reason he's in jail is because rape is illegal. The only reason we're having this conversation is because you refused to give anyone in New York a concealed carry permit. So the Supreme Court had to step in and say, hey, there's this thing called a Constitution, and you're violating it by not granting concealed carry permits to your citizens.
We're in the middle of a national gun violence crisis. It's claimed the lives of too many Americans, too many New Yorkers, and has inflicted trauma on communities all across our state. And I'm not just talking about New York City. I've been to our upstate cities and visiting them, and also dealing with the specter of what's going on in our smaller communities as well.
Exactly. And New York City has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. Yet and still, you're dealing with what you call a gun violence crisis. That means if no one in New York City was able to get a permit, only the criminals were walking around with guns, victimizing the citizens you refused to give gun permits to in order for them to protect themselves from the criminals who are illegally carrying guns.
What is so shocking, just weeks after that traumatic event, the Supreme Court decided, at a time when people are still mourning, they decided to strip away the rights of a governor to protect her citizens from gun violence by striking down a 100-year law. 100-year-old law that limits who can carry concealed weapons. So at a time when we're having a national reckoning on gun safety.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard were the words of a tyrant. I want you to understand what this woman just said. The Supreme Court just ruled that New York City's concealed carry permit process was unconstitutional because it was set up in such a way as to prevent almost anyone from being able to get a permit unless you were an elite. The court said that New York City must have an objective standard to determine who gets a permit. They didn't say they had to give a permit to any and everyone, but that it needed to be a fair process that citizens can objectively meet instead of someone subjectively deciding not to give out any permits. And her response to this is that the Supreme Court stripped away her rights as a governor because she doesn't want anyone in New York City to have a permit to carry a gun for their protection. The Bill of Rights was literally written to tell the government what they can't do against your rights. And she just said that the Supreme Court's attempt to protect the constitutional rights of New York citizens was a violation of her rights as a tyrant. I keep telling you, these people don't care about you. They only care about power and nothing more.
That decision wasn't just negligent, it was reprehensible. They removed long-standing limitations that we used here in New York.
Did she really just say that the Supreme Court's decision that New York citizens should have a right to carry a gun for protection is reprehensible? Remember when I said they don't want reasonable gun laws? They just want to ban guns? This is them saying it out loud. What is reasonable about not letting your law-abiding citizens carry firearms for their protection in a city where the criminals are running rampant with their own guns?
It took away limitations on who can carry them, taking away the ability to say, maybe not you, because of a propensity that you've demonstrated or a record or, what rational people would agree. Someone should not be able to be licensed to carry a weapon, not just carry a weapon, concealed weapon. And they took away that right, but we don't need more guns on our streets.
This is next level lying. The Supreme Court did not say you can't stop someone with a felony who is a criminal from carrying a gun. It said you had to restructure your permit process because it makes it impossible for anyone to get a permit the way it was currently situated. This is how they try to take advantage of people's ignorance. She's talking like the Supreme Court said that they have to give a gun to every single felon and criminal and D-boy in New York City.
We don't need guns on our streets. We don't need people carrying guns in our subways. We don't need people carrying guns in our schools. We don't need people carrying guns in our places of worship. We don't need them carrying them into bars or restaurants, because that'll only make people less safe.
They don't want you to have a gun at all. This is not about reasonableness. This is about banning guns and your right to carry them or own them. The only reason she's saying this stuff out loud is because she's speaking off the cuff. If you're not versed on the subject you're speaking about and you talk about it off the cuff, you'll default to your truth. She doesn't know what to say next, so she just says exactly how she feels.
And here's the proof, because everyone has this theory about the the good guy with a gun in his hand and how that's going to prevent violence. And I'm here to just dispel that right now, once and for all. We've had our sensible gun safety laws and concealed carry laws that we've had on the books for over 100 years. With that law, we are the 5th lowest in the nation in terms of firearm-related deaths.
Of course, New York has a lower firearm-related death rate. You don't let anyone own guns except criminals, which is probably why New York ranks 26 for violent crime rates.
Want some more proof? Let's look at the numbers of other states where people can have weapons, conceal them, carry them where they like. Mississippi has 28 deaths per 100,000 by firearm. Louisiana, 26 per 100,000 deaths by firearm annually. 25 per 100,000 in Wyoming. Missouri, 24 per 100,000. Alabama, 23. You know what New York State is? 5.3 deaths per 100,000. So this whole concept that a good guy with a gun will stop the bad guys with a gun, it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up. And the data bears this up. So that theory's over.
Yes, Mississippi has a higher firearm-related death rate than New York, but they also have a lower violent crime rate than New York. They're ranked 15th. The truth is, according to the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention, almost every major study on defensive gun use has found that Americans use their firearms defensively between 500,000 and 3 million times each year. So, until New York has zero violent crime, you have no right to deny people the right to carry a gun to protect themselves whenever they go out into a state with a violent crime rate of 363.8 per 100,000 people.
We didn't back down. We stood up and fought back. And as governor, my #1 responsibility is keeping New Yorkers safe. That's why when it came down to the Supreme Court decision, we were ready for it. We knew this case was on the docket since last fall. We worked with legal experts from all over the country. I mentioned the Gifford Center, Everytown. And we prepared for this moment. And what I had to do in the aftermath of that decision, so we called an extraordinary session, that's what it's called, and it was an extraordinary session. Because the legislature, and I want to thank our leaders, Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Speaker Carl Heastie, for bringing everyone back with that sense of urgency, which was genuinely real. And what we had to do is come back within days and say the Supreme Court justices, those in the majority, want to take us backwards. We're not going there with you. We're going to stand up, pass smart legislation, and that's what I signed immediately.
Long story short, the Supreme Court said you not allowing citizens to carry guns is unconstitutional. So the legislature literally hurried up to come back and pass laws that will make it impossible for these peon citizens to actually carry their guns anywhere, since they can no longer make it impossible for them to get a license in the first place. I want you to ask yourself, does this sound like a woman who is worried about safety, or does it sound like somebody who's worried about power and control over their citizens? Think about it. They call an emergency session just to make it harder for citizens who actually passed a background check, paid money, and went through the requirements to get a concealed carry license for them to actually be able to carry the gun anywhere. Also keep in mind, every group she said they work with to craft these new laws, there are anti-gun groups, every single one of them.
Under the Supreme Court's ruling, they would say anyone who wants a concealed carry permit could easily get one. We had a standard in place that you had to have a proper cause, you have to have a rationale for it. So we have to deal with the fact that we believe that people who now will be able to secure these under the ruling should go have a more comprehensive background check, an in-person interview.
These people are sick. What she's not telling you is that wanting to conceal carry permit for general protection was not considered a rational cause. If you pay attention, she exposes that the prior process was only for the elite. Now that the peon citizens will be able to get licenses to carry, they now need to beef up the process even more.
Household members' contact information, as well as reviewing social media. They also will undergo a 16-hour classroom training and a 2-hour live firearm training safety course. And we'll be the first state to require training for firearm permits, but it makes sense. Under the old laws, some counties required, but many did not. So it's time to standardize this across the state of New York. We developed new standards. It'll include training to make sure that gun owners have the skills, the knowledge necessary to carry, to store their guns.
Understand that the former process automatically denied you a permit if the reason for wanting one was for general safety. They knew this would make it nearly impossible to get a permit. But now that the Supreme Court said that you can't deny someone a permit simply because they want one for general protection, they are now creating a process to get a license that is so overwhelming, so time consuming, so expensive that will essentially have the exact same effect as the previous system.
They said that those who have concealed carry permits can pretty much take them anywhere they want. In response, we had to come up with a list of sensitive locations where guns are prohibited. These sensitive locations will include schools, colleges, daycares, libraries, restaurants that serve alcohol, other places, parks, places people visit, work. We have a whole list. We have a long website. Encourage you to look at that. And also, we added Times Square. The Supreme Court said you cannot carve out the entire borough of Manhattan, for example. We did not.
I told you, they literally banned everywhere people would go if they wanted to carry a firearm for protection. 54% of households in New York City do not own a car, and they rely on public transportation. While the so-called car culture dominates most American cities, mass transit has a defining influence on New York life. This means automatically, even with a permit, 54% of the population of New York City can't carry their gun anywhere because they can't carry their gun on public transit. What good is having a concealed carry permit if you can't carry your gun anywhere? That's how they restrict your right while smiling in your face and saying, oh, we support the Second Amendment and we're not trying to restrict your rights. On paper, you have the right, but in reality, you don't. Here's the truth. If a good guy with a gun doesn't stop a bad guy with a gun, why does she have any need for security? She's surrounded by people with guns everywhere she goes. Her security won't have to take off their guns whenever they go to all the places they're now telling you that you can't carry a gun. And that's exactly the way she wants it, because for the 50 millionth time, this is not about safety. It's about power and control. This woman literally said your right to carry a firearm infringes on her rights as a governor. Think about that for a second and tell me that doesn't sound like someone more concerned about her control than it does about your safety. You know, we talk a lot about empowerment in this country, except for when it comes to the Second Amendment. However, I can't think of anything more empowering than having the most effective tool to protect you and your family. So help me spread this message by liking and sharing this video with everyone you know. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment, because the Second Amendment, when it said militia, it wasn't talking about the government. It was talking about you. Also, if you want to know where to find the I'm the Militia shirt and merchandise, click the I'm the Militia link in the description section of this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, make sure you hit that bell symbol.